The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us in today's AIC seminar on collaborating to innovate for research organisations. I'll be covering off some of the details of that, and I also have two guest speakers today, Professor Paul Gadek from James Cook University and Dr. David Lacey from iDcare. Now, this seminar is brought to you by the Department of Science, IT and Innovation, and it's delivered by the Australian Institute of Commercialisation under that funding. Just a little bit about what the Australian Institute for Commercialisation is. We're set up to help industry, research organisations and government take innovative ideas to market. So we deliver a range of services in the area of innovation, commercialisation, collaboration. We manage the Queensland Inventor Service. We run some ideas to market workshops. We also run workshops on business model innovation and on our innovation clinics. Now, the objectives of today's webinar is to hear about the benefits of collaboration for both researchers and businesses, to get an understanding of the key steps involved in actually creating a collaboration, and most importantly, to hear some real-world experiences from researchers who've been down that path. Now, let's start by defining what we're talking about. And I really like this particular definition, and I've highlighted the key parts. It's about building on people's ideas, communicating and working together, and doing something differently to create value. Now, there are many different definitions of collaboration, but that one sums it up very nicely. Now, collaboration occurs on a continuum. Everything from a handshake deal where you might be sharing information with another organisation, through to sharing personnel and know-how, sharing resources, or even co-developing new products and services. Now, as you can see on this chart, as the risk and the complexity of the relationship increases, it also becomes increasingly more formal, and you step through to, for example, a confidentiality agreement or a memorandum of understanding, or if you're co-developing products and services, it may be as formal as a joint venture agreement between businesses. Now, speaking of businesses, this chart shows business collaboration with higher education research institutions. And if you look on the far right, that's Australia. We are traditionally quite poor at collaborating between businesses and universities, although we do a lot of really good quality research. So part of that issue is not knowing how to collaborate, and that's what today's seminar is helping to address. There's a lot more that can be done. Now, one of the reasons why we have such a low collaboration rate is a lot of our researchers are actually in universities and higher education institutions. But if you look at this graph, you can see that in other countries, many of the researchers are actually inside businesses, and that makes a difference. It's important because a lot of collaboration comes down to face-to-face contact and interaction with people. At the end of the day, it's a person-to-person relationship. And one thing that this graph illustrates is when researchers and business people are close to each other and mixing and working together, that's how you get really good collaboration. Now, in Australia, we do actually do a lot of work with businesses. You can see from this chart that the amount of expenditure on research and development with businesses to universities has been steadily increasing. And there is a lot of applied research and experimental development in there. So there is a lot going on, but it's not getting out there and being used by the businesses so well at the end. So key to that is understanding how businesses see collaboration and why they want to collaborate. So we're going to look at the different perspectives now and what's important for a business. Businesses are driven to collaborate by various external market factors. There may be changes in regulation or legal requirements that they have to meet. Certainly changes in technology are driving a lot of businesses to have a look around. The scalability of the solution is important, especially with access to the internet these days as a global marketplace. And then there are other general market factors such as consumers buying a lot more online, etc., that are externally driving companies to collaborate. But there's also internal factors driving them to collaborate. Company may not have the in-house knowledge and skills and resources. They're seeking to reduce the risks and costs of new products. They may not have access to the market, or they may lack access to the raw materials, or it could be that they can see opportunities to increase and grow the access to products and services and increase revenue. So these are the internal factors driving businesses to collaborate. Now, businesses that do collaborate do much better. And on this graph here, you can see the improvement in productivity. Those businesses that didn't innovate and didn't collaborate didn't really improve very much. But those businesses that both innovated and collaborated performed the best. Now that's important because a lot of innovation and collaboration, those businesses were working with universities. And this was the impact of it. From the business perspective, businesses that collaborate well are 5 times more likely to hire staff and twice as likely to be profitable. So when you as a researcher are going out and speaking to business, it's important to understand that it really does improve their bottom line. And when you as a business are talking to the universities, it's important to understand that it can also increase your bottom line. So why do the various groups collaborate? Now I'm going to quickly run through all 3 groups because the key to collaboration is understanding the point of view of the other side. It's the first step. If you understand what the drivers are and how they see things and what their constraints are, it makes it easier to begin the negotiation. A lot of collaboration is difficult because people don't necessarily understand what the drivers of the other organisation are. So why would a business want to collaborate with a university or with a government department? It's around, as I said earlier, about the external factors and internal factors driving them, about accessing knowledge and other resources that the business doesn't have in-house. Collaboration also benefits the triple bottom line, not just revenue, as we showed in the earlier slide about productivity, but also social and environmental requirements. A business might want to collaborate to upskill its employees. It might want to do so to promote its company and its products and services by showing that it's dealing with state-of-the-art technology, or if it may wish to influence decision-making, particularly if it's collaborating with a government department. So that's why a business would want to collaborate. Why would government want to collaborate? Government is concerned with policy and with dealing with very large-scale issues. So government might want to collaborate with a university or with a business to investigate a very large, serious, complex problem. It might also want to collaborate because it wants to understand and have some research done on what is driving economic development in a particular area or a particular industry. It's seeking to use this evidence to develop new policies, and it might want to collaborate to improve the delivery of services, government services, getting them out there being used by other people. And also from a government perspective, it can lend credibility and validity to projects that it's working with universities and with business. Now, why would a university want to collaborate? Well, as we all know, university researchers are really keen on bringing benefits to society and helping people. That's why here in Australia we do such a lot of medical research. But also from a university perspective, understanding what's out there in the marketplace, what government and business seeks, can help focus the research effort and ensure that the results are picked up and commercialised later. Sometimes research is doing consultancy and it's looking at solving a problem for industry or society. And some of that research might be around meeting national imperatives, dealing with major social problems, investigating big economic situations. A university might also collaborate to get extra funding for further research and education, and it might do it to increase the professional development of its staff, understanding what the key problems are in industry that require that really good quality research. And last but not least, universities also collaborate with businesses and with governments to give work experience to their students and to prove the employability of their students. All of these drivers are different for each type of organisation, but they're all important, and to understand that helps you understand how the other person sees it. So why would a business want to collaborate with a research organisation? Well, they might be looking to solve a technical problem that they have that requires some research. They may want to stay up to date with new developments in their area of industry and to tap into new ideas and technology that are being developed, prototypes and so on. And they may want to collaborate to transfer skills that the research team has to employees in the company. These are all primary reasons why businesses would collaborate with researchers. Now notice it's not just to do research. So it's important, if you are a researcher or an academic or a PhD student looking at these sorts of things, to understand that this is what a business is seeking to do and accomplish. Now, how do you collaborate if we understand the other perspective? Well, there are certain key parts. As I said before, collaboration is a person-to-person relationship, and the most important thing there is communication and leadership. You have to sit down and talk, discuss these things, and be actively involved. Collaborations that go poorly are often the case where the groups meet and then they go their own way for a long period of time and then come back together. And what has been presented between the parties was not what each party expected. So the way to prevent that happening is to make sure that you communicate well. Trust is very important, teamwork is very important, but also sitting down, agreeing what the goal is and the plan to get there. All parties must agree this, no matter who is in the room collaborating. It helps to have a diverse group of experiences and people and background and technical skills. You do need to build up respect, and last but not least, you need a written agreement. The purpose of a written agreement is to help clarify things in case any party makes assumptions that aren't actually correct. So when you go into a collaboration or you're thinking about collaborating with business or government or a research institution, stop and think about those essentials of success and think about what could be hindering you collaborating and what you can do to help address those issues, and plan. Now I'm going to step you through the process of what it's like to collaborate. So if we were to make up a checklist, first off you need to identify potential partners, and then you need to evaluate them and select the most appropriate one. You need to negotiate the terms of the commercial agreement. You should review the collaboration regularly as part of your communication and monitoring, and plan with the end in mind. If the collaboration is successful, how will it wind down, or how will it continue and set new goals? So those are essentially the steps of the collaboration process. Now coming back to the point I said earlier about the essentials, first build the relationship. When you're going to embark on a collaboration with another organisation, especially one that is in a different area to you and has a different perspective, sit down and make sure you have plenty of face-to-face meetings with all the right people in the room to agree the purpose of the collaboration and to bring into the open and discuss the expectations of each party. Make sure there's a common understanding of the scope of the work, the plan, and sit down and agree how decisions will be made amongst the group and in the various different organisations. Make sure that you allocate tasks, that there is responsibility and genuine accountability amongst the group and the team leaders, and all of these things help to build trust. Now, identifying potential partners. Sit down and think about who could be your potential collaboration partners and what are the factors that would drive them to want to collaborate with you if you are a business or a university. Again, this helps you think about what the interest would be from the other side, and that helps you come up with a common goal and understand what each party is trying to achieve. Now, in selecting and evaluating potential collaboration partners, these are really the checklists. Do you have clear shared goals? Are both organisations trying to achieve the same things? Are you in your organisation clear about what skills, abilities and resources you are bringing to the table for the collaborative effort? And are you clear about what you're wanting the other parties to bring? And last but not least on this list, the one that people often forget, is do all the organisations involved see their respective inputs and outputs as fair? Now that's very important because any sense of unfairness or possible resentment could cause a collaboration to fall about later, even if it's technically doing very well. So if there's any sense of unfairness, go back to the beginning about which each party is seeking to achieve, what their expectations are, and continue on that and be certain about that before you embark on it. Now, when you are looking around for partners, do remember to have a look at some of these things, especially if you are a researcher, a business is very different. It is important to understand those soft things, what the organisation's culture is, what its governance and organisational structure is, how it makes its decisions, what its policies are, for example, for occupational health and safety, what its financial resources are, if you're wanting to commit cash and in kind, and what its assets and funding base are. Now, a lot of this information can be found on organisations' websites, but it's worth also sitting down and discussing this with the other parties. Now, it's not expected that everything would be compatible, and in fact, some of the best collaborations come from diversity in the group, as I said before. So if there are areas of incompatibility, sit down and discuss and come to agreement with the other partner on them. So speaking of the agreement, this is just a quick checklist of the things you need to consider. Now, if you are in a university, you will have people available within your faculty or department or your commercialisation unit who are capable of drawing up these sorts of agreements and will do it for you. But the written agreement should be drawn up at the end of all the discussion and negotiation. So use this checklist to sit down and talk to the people who are your potential collaboration partners and agree all these things up front, then pass it over to the lawyers and have the agreement drafted. So milestones. Agree and record the milestones and link payments to milestones. This applies to both parties. Nobody thinks that research follows a complete project plan. There will always be elements where it changes and flexibility and so on, but that's part of why communication is important. But nonetheless, there needs to be a project plan to start off. So sit down and work out that project plan from the goals you're trying to achieve and what each party expects, and work out costs, tasks and reporting arrangements, IP, agree how the commercial benefits of the collaboration will be shared. That may be financial benefits. It also might be publicity and promotion. And as I said before, set out how the collaboration will be wound up when its goals have been met. So that's the milestone checklist. Costs. Remember there's cash, in kind. Think about who applies for and discharges grants. Think about background IP and any other significant contributions that are being included. Agree tasks and responsibilities. As I said before about project planning and being flexible to adjust research as it goes along, it's still the more planning you do up front, the smoother the project will run. So get the right people involved at the right time. Remember, as I said on the essentials of the soft skills, somebody needs to lead the collaboration from both groups. So not only there needs to be an overall person, but each organisation needs to have an appointed project manager in their group so that there is responsibility and accountability. And most importantly, meet regularly and monitor progress towards those milestones in the project plan. IP is always an issue. And so you need to sit down and work out who owns it, who has the rights to use it and for what purposes. It's not always necessary for a business to own the IP. What it really needs to be able to do is to use it to sell its products and services. So that's worth bearing in mind. Who pays for the IP to be protected and at what stages? And what happens if the ownership of the IP is challenged by a third party? These are sorts of things that should be discussed up front. Now remember, the point of this collaboration is to achieve a goal. And so if it's successful, it's worth writing down and agreeing how those benefits will be shared. And again, as I said, plan the exit, determine how it will be wound up when goals have been met. So that's a quick checklist of the sorts of things that you need to consider. But do be aware of some risks. Partners may not honour the spirit of the collaboration, and there might be a loss of time and effort if all partners don't fully participate, and that could be caused by one or more parties seeing their contribution is not fair. Collaboration takes a lot of time and effort, so make sure the project is worth it. Be aware there could be loss of IP from various parties, and there are reputational risks to the party if the collaboration is not a success. Perhaps one of the ones you can do the most about is a lack of collaboration skills of participants is a risk. So both from the university perspective and from the business perspective and from the government perspective, it's worth training people who are going to be involved in the collaboration and giving them some basic skills in how to do it. Certainly that will help reduce the risks. Now the other thing to bear in mind, of course, and I'll throw this in at the end about funding. Everybody knows about funding from the various funding councils and federal funding, but one that will be of interest to businesses in Queensland and to Queensland research institutions is the Accelerate Ideas grant funding. There are a few details on my slide. Matching grants between 25 and 50k. The project is close to market. It has market demand for it. It contributes to business growth, etc., etc. So it has to be something that is of business interest. And that comes back to those statements about what drives a business and what they're interested in to bear in mind. So that's just a quick overview. If you're interested in more information, please have a look at the Queensland Government website on Accelerate Ideas. And that just about wraps it up for me for my quick coverage on how to collaborate. Now I'm fortunate today to have two guest speakers, and I would very much like to introduce the first one. That is Professor Paul Gadek from the College of Marine and Environmental Sciences at James Cook University. And he's going to talk about his involvement with regional economic development groups. Paul, over to you. Paul, you're still muted.
There we go. Sorry about that. I was concentrating on bringing the screen up. Sorry, Sam. Sorry, everyone. I wanted to start off with just giving you a bit of a brief background to myself and to my experiences as a collaborator and as a university researcher. I think that's probably important to understand where I'm coming from. So apologies for the bit of history here. But I'm basically a biologist who became interested in regional economic development when I moved up to Cairns and to JCU at the end of 1995. I moved up from Sydney. And I became involved in the debate about the Cairns economy. Previously, of course, the economy up here was heavily reliant on agricultural industries. Things like sugar and dairy and tobacco, they're all in long-term decline. And they're all being affected by varying degrees of global factors. And so over the past 30 years or so, the region developed a very strong tourism industry. And the tourism industry up here now rivals the size of the regional economic agricultural sector and has outstripped the agricultural sector for GRP for many years. And so we have this economy which is increasingly reliant and specialised on an industry that has a level of risk which is quite large. The industry itself, the tourism industry, you could imagine, is would be particularly impacted by global events such as SARS or bird flu or terrorism or transport disruptions, fuel prices, etc., etc. So we have this dilemma of an economy which is increasingly specialised, but for which we need some resilience to cope with these levels of risk. And for a biologist, though, the region is also recognised as having a significantly high level of biodiversity, which underpins both agriculture and the tourism industry. So you've got this entity that is actually the reason that the economy exists up here, whether it be in agriculture or tourism. So I became interested in raising awareness and developing opportunities, business opportunities in what I call bio-based industries in northern Queensland. And so I was involved in setting up some initiatives within the university, joint collaborative ventures with state government departments, particularly around innovative food solutions, and externally through community groups, both at the city and the state level. So these economic development groups were trying to increase or decrease the risk on the economy, and realise, I think, some of the economic potential of the region around the biodiversity that we have here. So I've been a director of Regional Development Australia. I'm a member of the Mentoring for Growth panel up here in Cairns. I'm also part of the Institute of Company Directors. Within the university, what I tried to do is to bring some of these activities together, and so back in 2004 I established a centre within JCU that is called, and I thought I had it on the slide here, but it's not coming up. Why isn't it coming up? There we go, called the Centre for Tropical Agri-tech Research. And what I was trying to do was to bring a lot of the activity within the university around bio-based industries together. And so it had a number of units of activity there around how we might increase and improve opportunities, primarily to diversify the regional economy up here. This centre has now been disestablished. It had a good decade run, but there are still some activities that were introduced in the centre still continuing today. So things like the Rapid Assessment Unit, where we're looking at how we introduce non-invasive technologies into food safety and quality. That still continues today. That's a joint venture with a state government and industry partners. Novel crops is continuing, molecular farming, looking at how we can value add to agricultural activities up here in the north by focusing on other attributes of some of the crops, still continues today. And I was involved in a number of other things as well. This is becoming a bit boring, but never mind. Other activities including membership of a steering committee that looked at undertaking an assessment of the feasibility of a business incubator in the Cairns region. At that particular time, the state government was very keen to establish a technology business incubator up here in Cairns. Unfortunately, it didn't come off. Also played a bit of a role in establishing the Australian Tropical Forest Institute and the Australian Tropical Herbarium here in Cairns, which is a collaborative venture between agencies like CSIRO and other government departments. So I guess the point of this is that I've probably had a direct involvement in all of the forms of collaboration that Sam had indicated in one of her earlier slides, right from a handshake through to a formal joint venture. So, and I think Sam's probably outlined this pretty well, but you know, in terms of why universities should be involved in these sorts of things, I also had a slide which sort of said the same things that Sam mentioned there before about you know, the role of a university, what we might expect from a university, particularly a regional university, and its impact on the local economy. And there's a particular area there about driving innovations, making discovery, and a site and a catalyst for innovation. There's no shortage of creativity here in the tropics, and particularly in the university. And my university, like all others, is full of researchers that have these great ideas, and they make discoveries, and they have this high quality and high impact research, which is at the very heart of the university's mandate. But very little actually makes it through to commercialisation. That is, very little of it has an actual impact on our life. There's also a considerable amount of research and development work being undertaken through private individuals and consortiums in this region as well. And it's very hard to get a data on, if you like, the level of creativity in a particular region. But one thing we did look at a few years ago was the number of patent applications generated in the region. And the figures I saw several years ago suggested that this region up here was at least on par and possibly ahead of a national average per head of population. Of those, agricultural producers represented by far the largest segment of tropical innovators. So there's a lot of on-farm experimentation and innovation, and a lot of the development and the introduction of new technology comes from on-farm experimentation and on-farm innovation of processes. It often leads, the introduction of technology into regions comes from farming practices. So some years ago, I was also chair of a regional economic development cluster called BioNQ. We formed that in 2002, so a few years ago, in response to industry demand, and it was assisted by the Department of Primary Industries at the time, the Cairns Regional Economic Development Corporation, and the Atherton Tableland Sustainable Regions Program. And if you want further information on clusters, because I'm going to talk a little bit about them here, have a look at this report. Yes, I know it's a decade old, but still, you know, it does provide some references to and further information on clusters and clustering. And clusters, I guess, is another way in which your future collaborative ventures can be developed. So clusters bring together many, within which more formal, you know, one-on-one collaborative ventures might be instigated. So let me, and a lot of the stuff that Sam's been talking about in terms of the development of collaboration also applies to clusters. Our little cluster around bio-based industries, BioNQ, we define bio-based industries as how we might innovatively utilise our renewable, biological and agricultural resources to develop industries and technologies and product and processes. Another way of talking about this is tropical expertise. So we identified and helped identify and promote tropical expertise as part of the value proposition for businesses in this region. In other words, they were able to use their tropical expertise as part of their pitching to investors and as part of their way of attracting funds into their particular development. The tropical expertise itself as a concept has penetrated now right into regional economic development and business initiatives such as Advanced Cairns and state government departments. The state governments now use, and indeed our own Warren Ench up here, our federal member, now in the last year or so has started to use the term tropical expertise when he talks about how things are done up here as an added value proposition for businesses to attract funds. But the whole point is that novel ideas, technologies, or processes, or even products don't necessarily by themselves attract investors. That's not the thing that attracts an investor. It's the business entity itself. The business entity that has incorporated the idea or the process or the product can show how to deploy that idea or that technology or that product. It's that business entity itself that attracts the investment. And what we need to look at is how we bridge the gap between the idea and the market. And to do that, of course, it requires management and it requires support. And you know, for 20 years we've been talking about the need for regions in Australia to better engage with the knowledge economy. And you know, Sam showed that graph to us before to show how little we actually engage as researchers with businesses. So that link between the rate of innovation, engaging with the knowledge economy and increasing business resilience as well, has been very widely recognised. And in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, we had the Australian Industry Group highlighting the need for greater collaboration between business, government and the education and training sector in the launch of their new leadership policy report, which is called Addressing Enterprise Leadership in Australia. So they're calling for major changes in the culture, management culture, if Australia is to transform and secure an innovative, competitive and sustainable economic, employment and industry base. We've been talking about it for 20 years. How do we do it? Innovation doesn't take place in isolation. It's systematic. And if we want to increase our rate of innovation, we need to encourage the networks between the different facets of the innovation chain. So I mentioned earlier an example of a regional cluster that I was involved with called BioInQ. The cluster model, what the cluster model does is break down communication barriers between a range of business entities, between government, educational and community institutions. Breaks down that communication barrier, it generates trust and it generates face-to-face interactions. So clustering is one way to bridge the gap. Industry clusters are a global phenomenon. They're widely credited as being a key mechanism in achieving and sustaining competitive advantages for regional economies and around the world, in America and New Zealand, particularly in Europe and in France. Clustering is looked at as a way of bridging communication barriers between researchers and business. It's based on a philosophy of regional businesses competing collaboratively in the global marketplace, and it's proved success in assisting the growth and development of a diverse range of industry sectors. And so the benefits of clustering have been widely discussed in recent years, and you may have heard of the seminal work of Michael Porter in the late 1980s. It's been around for a while. So growth and jobs are developed through increased innovation by encouraging this value-added technological and creative activities at a regional level. Innovation is essentially the smart application of that knowledge of finding more imaginative ways of doing business. But this depends on connectivity in various forms, because without it, innovation rarely occurs. The direct relevance of clusters is that they are a proven method of encouraging collaboration and connectivity between businesses and research institutions, and between businesses and government. What we found in terms of BioInQ is that what was really valuable for us was sharing what doesn't work, what we've tried and doesn't work, rather than actually telling everybody how to do their business, how it's actually going to work. Clusters require champions, and they require leadership as a priority. If you look at this report from 2005 from RRDC, you'll see a cluster development flowchart. It's pretty similar to what Sam has outlined, except that what we're doing is bringing together a large number of industry partners and researchers prior to defining within that cluster who is actually going to develop a formal collaboration, because that requires talking and communicating and understanding what the drivers are of each of the institutions. Industry clusters have a life cycle. The needs vary during the cycle, so there is an end point to it. And the only other thing I'd say, that in the cold, hard light of day, successful collaboration depends on mutual appreciation and understanding of the business models, the drivers of the various entities. So if you look at university research, it's very much project-driven. We have funding cycles, we have costs for infrastructure, we have human capital costs, and we have hidden administrative costs and no profit margins that impact on our drivers. Government departments are often determined by political cycles and bureaucracy, and businesses usually are driven by the bottom line. They need to sustain or to develop or to increase the bottom line. Look, thanks for listening, and now hopefully I'm going to link across to David.
Thank you very much, Paul, for covering not only the individual perspective, the university perspective, and what it's like from the business, and talking about what you've done over time, what the university has built up, and what can be done in the future. Now I'd like to introduce, from the business university perspective, Dr. David Lacey from the University of the Sunshine Coast, who's both a researcher and a managing director of a startup company, iDcare. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Sam. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So I thought I'd just spend a couple of minutes giving a quick background to iDcare. It's somewhat of an unorthodox start to the world. It took 24 months to get going, and I'll explain a little bit about that journey. It was launched by the respective Ministers for Justice in Australia and New Zealand in October last year in Australia and March this year in New Zealand, as providing the National Identity Support Service to the community as a free and anonymous service, but also with a business and a heavily focused research dimension to it. Its background is an interesting one. It's we had a 16-strong steering committee that was formed not long after I left an executive role in the Commonwealth. My time in the Commonwealth Government for the good part of the last decade was spent in looking at people committing identity crime against the Australian community and aspects of the New Zealand community. So that, I guess, background and the networks that I'd established over that time was brought to bear in creating a steering committee of executives across government and industry and academia on both sides of the Tasman that really wanted to answer the question as to how big we thought the problem was impacting Australia and New Zealand. There have been some studies over the past decade that touched on the topic, but nothing that really looked at it in any meaningful way. And when we say impact, it means not just on the individual, but across business of all sizes and government at all levels. So that steering committee really formed part of what ultimately became iDcare in terms of sharing their own experiences and ideas. It's not set up as a centre within a university context per se, although it has got at the moment, five partners that are tertiary institutions, and those partners contribute at present 3 doctoral students, 4 honours students and 14 undergraduate practicum students. We've got students flying from Melbourne to the Sunshine Coast to undertake their research and practical experience as an example. So the tertiary sector is a very big part of what we do. It's a natural affiliation that I have through my work at the University of the Sunshine Coast as a senior research fellow in identity security, but there's a lot of complementary work that occurs from both sides. The starting point for us in terms of iDcare has been what was the missing piece of a COAG, or a Council of Australian Governments endorsed priority around supporting the public to restore their identity following an identity theft event. Identity theft has 2 dimensions. There's the compromise of personal information through theft or hacking, and the misuse of it. And the misuse often results in fraudulent spends of account information, the acquisition of new services in people's names. So that's the scope and dimension. It's both an online and physical responsibility that iDcare has, so it's not a cyber centre and it's not just a physical centre, it's both worlds. And iDcare operates toll-free national hotlines. We have counsellors and psychologists that operate those lines, and they can receive calls from any part of the country on any topic relating to someone's identity. So it's a bit like that show, Thank God You're Here. You're not quite sure what you're going to get when the phone rings at iDcare in terms of what the client's situation is at the other end of the phone. But our counsellors and psychologists are trained to provide the emotional and behavioural support, but also the quite pragmatic support to make the journey as harmless as possible for the person that needs to respond to their identity that's been compromised. From a research and innovation perspective, you could probably guess that the majority of the cases that identified and responded to provide a real richness of data on the problem and provide a richness of data in terms of how organisations are responding to the issue, where organisations are relative to others, and indeed what are the most effective response measures out there. So it's a research-rich environment, and that's part of the reason why we've been successful in drawing upon at the moment 5 tertiary sector partners, and no doubt expanding into the future. The organisation itself is doubling in size every 6 months. We now have 29 staff and volunteers. We're anticipating we'll have 60 by the end of next financial year. The results of the 24-month feasibility study painted this picture for us in terms of Australia. So we're looking at around 1.7 million Australians per year impacted. So we very quickly wanted to establish how big the market size was and a whole host of other variables around that. We undertook focus groups with people that have been impacted by identity theft across regional Australia and parts of New Zealand as well as metropolitan areas. We really wanted to get a sense of what was the need out there before iDcare was officially launched by the respective ministers. What we developed was a series of different services. The most prominent is the case management service. That's central to everything we do. It's part of our strategic plan as being the focal point of the organisation. If we get the client side right, then all else will fall into place is the focus and strategy that we have, and that includes the research and innovation that comes. We have a number of values within the organisation. One of the values that we have is that we strive to innovate and never accept the status quo. We develop our people to make them irresistible to others, and our work is very serious, but we try not to take ourselves too seriously. We deal with people in crisis, and we deal with people that have suicidal thoughts, and so that's a very serious part of what we need to respond to, and so we try and make our culture one where we're supporting each other and carrying each other in those experiences as well as obviously our clients. We have a whole host of research services around what we do, and the alert service is an example of that, where we're providing alerts to organisations and the community around new and evolving threats and quarterly reports on what the market's telling us. I'll just share a quick insight. When I was promoting the service to the telecommunications industry in New Zealand a few months ago, I had all the telcos in a room, and I remember saying to them, in the last month, iDcare has spoken to $300,000 worth of your business. What do you want us to tell them? And so by saying that, I immediately translated what was on the face of it a not-for-profit charity dealing with the community into a very real commercial prospect for these organisations. So part of what we do is translating what we're seeing into a business environment or a government environment, and that's been quite successful for us today to attract partners. Paul mentioned before the different perspectives of academia versus business. Our starting prospect with our academic partners is, how is your research going to benefit our clients? In fact, we won't sponsor research and we won't support students and researchers unless they can demonstrate feasibly that they will have applied social benefits and outcomes. And that remains a very key pillar for our engagement with the tertiary sector. So that's all I wanted to share with you about iDcare, and Sam, over to you, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for that, David. Gentlemen, we haven't got any questions come up yet, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you if there was one thing, one message that you would want to get across to the people listening today, a short, sharp message, what would you want to say in terms of what you have learnt about collaboration? Paul, would you like to go first?
Thanks, Sam. In terms of collaboration is very much a personal experience. You need to develop that relationship with the people, the entities that you're going to collaborate with. It's very hard to collaborate with a faceless organisation. You actually have to have some sort of personal connection. with the industry that you're dealing with. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yep, thank you. David, if I were going to ask you the same question, what would be the most important lesson that you would pass on to somebody who's listening today? What would you like to say?
Have an open mind and don't assume that you necessarily have all the answers. That's why we collaborate. And don't forget to be resilient and roll with the punches.
Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think that wraps up today's seminar. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you to our guest speakers for their experiences. I'll now bring this seminar to a close, this webinar to a close. Thank you very much. Goodbye.